Gravel and adventure bikes have come an awfully long way in a few short years. Mercifully, the days of fitting the widest rubber you could into a cyclo-cross bike are well behind us, and we now have a wide range of gravel and adventure bikes purpose-built for going on and off-road. And in my opinion, bikes like this, the BMC Unrestricted, really point to the future direction of gravel bikes. And in this video, I'm going to explain why I think more bikes should go in the direction this bike is going in, and some of the features this bike has which are borrowed from the mountain bike world. I have my thoughts distilled around what a gravel bike needs to be and what features it needs to work on and off-road by riding the recent Grind Enduro gravel race, not a race, that you might have seen my video on, link above if you missed it. So in this video, I want to share my thoughts on why I think bikes like this really point to the direction that gravel bikes need to go in, and why a bike works so well on and off-road. One of the reasons this bike works so well is in borrowing lots of tech and features from mountain bikes. Now, the influence from mountain bikes into drop bar road bikes is nothing new. We've seen it over the last few years. Disc brakes, tubeless wide tyres, lower range gears and many more. But this bike borrows a lot more and just the right amount to make it a gravel bike that works off-road without trying to be a mountain bike. I think that's a really key point. Now, many of the popular comments I get when reviewing gravel bikes like this is that you would be better off on a mountain bike. And in many cases, that's true. A hardtail mountain bike might be a better choice for you, depending where you ride and how you ride these bikes. But for me, the reason I love these bikes is they fit in that narrow gap, that niche between a mountain bike and a drop bar, cyclocross or endurance road bike with fat tyres fitted. And I have a mountain bike, and I go mountain biking with that bike. I ride woody trails and find the most extreme technical trails I can, really challenge myself, occasionally scare myself as well, but I'm riding 100% off-road, trying to find the most technical trails I can. Where a gravel bike works is riding trails that would be tame on a modern full suspension advanced mountain bike. Tracks like this, which in the 90s, yes, would be fine on a mountain bike, but mountain bikes in the 90s were pretty crap, as you might have seen in my video, link above if you missed it, where I compared a retro 90s mountain bike to a modern gravel bike. So pathways like this, edge of field stuff, single track in the woods, fairly tame stuff, and then lots of road to link it all together. And before I get into the detail about this bike, I do think there's a fine line between what a gravel bike needs to bring from the mountain bike world without trying to be a mountain bike. Suspension, full suspension, drop posts, those are all up for debate. But in my mind, this bike right now borrows just enough tech and enough features from a mountain bike to benefit a gravel bike for the type of riding it's designed for without trying to be a mountain bike. So you can have a mountain bike and this bike in your garage, and they're very different purposes, different riding styles. So let me dive into this bike in a bit more detail, the tech, the features, and the reason I think more gravel bikes should move in this direction that the BMC Unrestricted is already going in. And let me know what you think in the comment section down below. The first key detail on this bike is the geometry. So the angles of the tubes, the measurements between the tubes, how it all fits together, and that really impacts the riding style and the capability of the bike off-road. And mountain bikes, since they've developed in the 70s and 80s, have moved further and further away from the road bikes they were based on in the early days. And this bike is also moving away from the road and cyclocross bikes gravel bikes were first based on in the early days. So this BMC has a really long wheelbase, a really slack head angle, and a really long reach. Now the reach is a key feature in mountain bikes. Basically they've got longer over the years if you're paying any attention to mountain bikes, and that combined with a short stem. Now the idea of a long reach and a slack head angle and a short stem is to put the front wheel further out in front of you, so you're behind that front axle, and that really makes a big difference when you're riding down very steep tracks. So more weight is behind the front wheel, you're not pitched over the front wheel so aggressively, and that gives you more control, more able to put the bike where you want and not being bucked around like a buckaroo. And that geometry makes a real difference when you're riding off-road, as I found out in Wales for the Grind Enduro event. There are some very steep, technical, rooty, rocky, slabby trails that on a normal road-based gravel bike I know would have been terrifying. A lot of weight over the drops, over that front wheel. But this bike, because you're further behind the front wheel, it made a big difference. That length, the long wheelbase, made the bike much more stable. I was in more control more of the time, and less scary and experience than it would have been on a normal gravel bike. So I think the geometry set up in this bike, just to recap, the long reach, the head angle, the wheelbase, and a short stem work really well as a really good influence from mountain bikes. And I hope to see more gravel bikes also be inspired by mountain bikes and the BMC. The big other influence from mountain bikes on this bike, as you can see, it's a massive wide range cassette on this bike. So we have a mountain bike SRAM Eagle rear mech and a 1052 cassette. I know it looks odd, and I've got loads of comments on this cassette when I've been riding it, and it's so much bigger than any road-based cassette. But when you're riding off-road and riding up the mountains of Wales, it makes a big difference. It works extremely well. Yes, the gaps might sometimes be bigger than you want, but for riding off-road, when you're riding really steep and unpredictable terrain, the cassette works wonders. So this mountain bike influence here, also with the one bite at the front, works wonders for me. I don't see any reason to go in a different direction to buy smaller cassettes when you're riding off-road. And when you are on the road, it works fine. Got a 10.2 sprocket, you can go plenty fast enough to the point where the tyres are probably the limiting factor rather than the gear range. If you were mountain biking way back in the 90s, you might remember soft tails. For a brief moment, they were the absolute pinnacle of suspension technology before more complicated linkage-driven suspension designs were developed and evolved and improved. But a soft tail on a bike like this actually works really well. So BMC has developed a system delivering 10 millimeters of cushioning. Not really suspension, but a flex along the rear stays that allows this elastomer here and the two rods inside to deliver a bit of compliance when you're riding off-road. And it really does work extremely well. When you're riding really rough gravel and tree routes, you can feel the difference it makes. You don't really notice it working so much as you don't notice so many vibrations and impacts coming through the back of the frame and wheel and into the saddle. And it definitely delivers more smoothness than other rigid gravel bikes I've ridden with the same tyres at the same pressures. And on long gravel rides, I feel less tired and less beaten up by riding the BMC. All gravel bikes now have disc brakes, as it makes sense when you're riding off-road, have the extra braking power, control, and just low maintenance you get from disc brakes, and not having a rim brake caliper doesn't restrict tyre clearance, so all good things. This BMC is very unique in having a larger 180mm disc brake rotor on the front, where most bikes have a 160, and that bigger rotor, although it doesn't sound much, just 20mm, makes a big difference when you're riding long, fast, rough, rowdy descents. Gives you more control, definitely more braking power, and the less chance of the brake overheating due to that bigger disc brake rotor. And I like to see more gravel bikes go in this direction while having a bigger front brake rotor. Most modern mountain bikes have very short stems and very wide handlebars, and that's what we see here. We have a much shorter stem and a much wider flared handlebar than you normally get on a road bike and many other gravel bikes. And that short stem is made possible by the long reach we have on this frame, so you're not compromising your fit on a bike, but getting all the benefits of a long reach and a short stem. And then the wide handlebar, you can go even wider than this as well, with a flare that drops, gives you much more control, much more leverage over the steering when you're descending very steep and curvy trails. So that's definitely a good influence from mountain bikes. Short stems and wide bars definitely amp up the handling on a gravel bike. So those are some of the reasons, the tech features that really stand out for me and why I think the BMC Unrestricted works so well off and on road, and why I think it points to the future of gravel bikes, and why I want to see more gravel bikes and more bike brands be influenced by mountain biking in the same way that BMC clearly has with this Unrestricted. There are other features we could look at on a gravel bike from mountain bikes. So dropper, height adjustable seat posts are one, and more suspension is another one. But I do think that this bike borrows just enough from the mountain bike world while blending it with everything else we want from a road bike, like speed, low weight and performance, and makes it a really good package that works extremely well off-road and on-road and doing it all together seamlessly. Anyway, let me know what you think of this BMC and some of the tech features I talked about in this video, and whether you agree or disagree with my opening statement, whether this is the future of gravel bikes. Love to hear your thoughts as always, so get typing down below. Anyway, that's all for now. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter for behind the scenes of the latest test bikes I'm riding at the moment, and I'll see you all again very soon. Thank you so much for watching.